Welcome, everyone. This is another meeting of our Amherst Security Group. We are meeting virtually again, and we also have a special guest speaker tonight. Maril Vernon is joining us to talk about Purple Team. I'll just turn it over to you, Maril.
Yeah. Oh, hello. Thank you so much for having me here today. And thank you to all of you who showed up to learn more about this specialized service and product that I've been building in cyber for the last 3 years. I'm really excited to get to tell you all more about it. So jumping right in. So this is kind of my Purple Team 101 talk, and I call it Pioneering a Purple Team Program because it's kind of going to go over at a very high. Are you gonna make me click? Okay, click. It's going to make me go over at a very high level, kind of the methodology of purple teaming planning for starting a program like this, a possible roadmap of how integrating purple team operations could look like, some of my favorite resources and tools and documentation. But we're also going to go over basically what it is, why we do it, some basic team compositions. And I'm basically just going to try and impart to you as much of the overview of a purple team as I possibly can in the next 40 minutes. So, for those of you who don't know who I am, I get to come here and speak with you today because I'm Robert's coworker and I forced myself on him. But also, I entered cyber 3 years ago. And pretty much right when I started pen testing back in 2019, I immediately began purple teaming because I was kind of a little one-woman show. I worked in a very small security department. We had basically the CISO, an architect, the InfoSec program manager, and me, the pen tester. And I remember the day that I had done a pen test on our firewalls, and I do them 6 months apart. And I remember that I didn't have to change the dates on one of my pen test reports. And it really broke my heart because I was like, wow, all of my findings from last time are still there. Like no one has had time to look at these and fix them, and the environment's the same. And I didn't feel like I was helping to secure my company at all. And that made me feel really, really sad as a pen tester because as hackers, we really enjoy coming in and breaking the things. But at the end of the day, we're all here to help secure the organization. So, working for an SMB sized company, I was like, just give me access to the logging platforms and the SIM and the threat hunting tools. And I, who knows where, when, and how I execute certain exploits, I will threat hunt myself. And I will make sure that I pinpoint at least the like the bottleneck where you're not seeing the things that you should be seeing from an attacker if it's in the environment. And at least if I do have to bug someone from IT to help me remediate something, I can take up as little of their time as possible and point them right to a good actionable solution. And so I pretty much started defining purple teaming as I went along. Before that, I was a completely non-technical person. I worked in social media marketing. So that's why my story is a little unique. I started off kind of inspiring people to come join cyber, even if they have no previous technical experience. And I think that diversity of thought and diverse backgrounds is what makes cyber the great thing that it is. So that's me at a high level. You can find me on LinkedIn and add me. I would love to have you on my network. I'm also the host of a podcast aimed at more diversity in cyber. So more on that at the end. Back to purple teaming. So the methodology. So a lot of people ask me, what is a purple team? And with that, what is a purple team exercise? What does this mean? What are you doing actually in the job? And if you look up purple teaming, it is defined as this a cybersecurity testing exercise in which a bunch of experts come together and do a testing thing, and it delivers some assurance, and it's tailored realistic assurance. And I don't know, this feels like a very Theranos definition of purple teaming to me. I really hate it a whole bunch. So I actually started defining purple teaming as a very simple concept. Before we get into that, a lot of people think this is purple teaming. It's really when you have a red teamer sit with your blue team while you're having a pen test or a red team engagement done. And basically that red teamer tries to guide your blue team into finding the red team. Now, this is one style of purple teaming that can be done. Kind of the catch-all with purple teaming is that there is no one right way to do it. Technically, all of the ways are the right ways, but I definitely have a way that I believe in more than the others, and a scalable approach that I've implemented over a number of companies, including Zoom. So this is kind of the catch me if you can style that I recommend only after you've matured purple team ops to a certain degree. Another style is to do it this way, where you literally just have a red teamer executing in real time, and the blue team are trying to find them, and they don't talk to each other. The only person who knows what's going on both sides is a purple team liaise, who's coordinating activities between the teams and trying to guide the blue team to like what ports and services open callbacks might be on, where certain IOCs might be, etc. But again, even though this isn't wrong, I don't think this is the most effective way to go about purple teaming. I think purple teaming is truly the most effective when you bring the blue teamers, and that might be people from a number of different teams, as we'll go over in a few slides, the red teamers, and the proper purple team operators together, and everyone is talking to each other at the same time, collaborating on exercises. So even though I just told you what purple teaming technically is not, to me, the definition that my cohorts and I, people like George Chiles from Scythe and Dan DeClass over at PlexTrack, people who obviously own companies aimed at purple teaming, we think that purple teaming is really just members of red and blue teams working in collaboration, explaining and repeating attack activities together in real time to actionably, measurably improve defenses. So rather than doing that very CTF style type of engagement, or just facing teams off against each other and just kind of seeing who's able to prevail. Again, I think that type of adversarial emulation has its place, but it has its place much farther along in the maturity model than when you start out purple teaming. So really, purple teaming is just a collaborative function of security. And true, you do want to bring together members of the red team because they are the offensive and the exploit experts. And you want to bring together members of a blue team, but that could be almost anybody. And actually, it might even be people from your yellow team, which are technically the builders of your companies. So developers, infrastructure people, architects, these people are technically on what we would refer to as the yellow team. So that new little tidbit I referenced earlier is that there's kind of a new thing I've been purporting in a lot of my talks, where I'm telling people that I have a lot of people coming to me saying, I'm a developer right now, or I do infrastructure as a code right now, or I'm a tool builder or a code slinger, and I really want to work on a purple team. Like, how do I get into purple? And I'm like, I just want to let you guys know, you guys as members of the yellow teams, to work in collaborative security, do not have to be on a proper purple team. You don't have to be where the detection engineers and the CTI folks and the pen testers are. You don't have to be a part of that team to do a collaborative security function. Really, what you just want to do is you want to collaborate with other people, with defenders and with the people who are experts at attacking or breaking your function. And you want to make sure that you're working and learning with them to secure your company. But that's not always going to be a purple team. As with the primary and secondary colors, if you're working on a yellow, that might be an orange or blue team. So if you're, developer, if you're working on an API, if you're working on a new web application, you might work with a pen tester and try and figure out how they do hack APIs, how they do find insecurities in your code, and that will help you be better at your job. You might work with blue teamers to implement DevSecOps or AppSec, and that would make you better at your job. But you don't need to be on my purple team to do it. I just want you guys to know that under this definition, purple teaming on this slide could technically just be replaced with white teaming. White teaming is just when all of the functions in an IT and security department are working together just to secure their org. So that's just my one little tangent. That's where I'm going to leave that one. Are there any questions so far on what purple teaming is and why we do it? Okay, I will assume that is a no. So we will get into the when and the why a bit later, but basically you start purple teaming when you kind of realize, like, as a red teamer, that either you're kind of giving the blue side op fatigue, or your findings aren't disappearing, or you don't have any visibility into the full remediation of those findings. I know when I worked on a red team, a lot of stakeholders would ask us, oh, well, that finding is really bad. What happened with that? Was it fixed? We don't know. Do they plan to fix it? We don't know. Did they just accept it? We don't know. As red teamers, we are not given any insight into the remediation management cycle of this company. we pretty much execute the operation, hand over the report, and that's the last we hear of it. We don't have any idea what's actually done with those things. And as a red teamer, that really, really broke my heart. So on this slide is basically a sample flow of how a purple team exercise, when you execute them collaboratively, like I just discussed, can go. So again, we're not doing, oh man, no, you're advancing my slide. Bad. We're not doing this style. On that slide is an example of this style of purple team exercise. So I'm not going to go over the whole thing. Feel free to read it later. It'll be in the deck for you. But this is kind of an example of how some of the first purple team exercises that I ever execute, once I figure out who the various people on my various teams will be, this is a lot, pretty much how it looks. And a lot of this comes from the PTEF, from the good folks over at Scythe. Okay, so any questions on that now that I've added that bit before I move on to planning a purple team exercise? Okay, I will assume no. Okay, so how does a purple team look? Who actually belongs on a purple team? I always say that purple teamers can come from anywhere. So not that I want to deter people who are developers or architects from coming to a purple team if that's what they really want. I just don't want them to think that's what they have to do in order to be involved. But I always say anyone can just wake up one day and decide they want to be a purple teamer. Sometimes it's people like me on the right side over here, one red teamer who has access to certain platforms and tools that will help them be both parts themselves, or a blue teamer who one day decides that, you know, he would like to more proactively, he or she would like to more proactively test defenses, and they start teaching themselves offensive capabilities. And then, of course, they know where all the places are to go look. I always say the better you are at building and securing a thing, the more intelligently you will know how to attack that thing. Like, you know where the pieces are that if someone hasn't configured it correctly, it could lead to a vulnerability. So some of the best purple teamers I've ever seen were actually former blue teamers. They didn't necessarily start off as pen testers. So if you're a one-person show, it could look a lot like this. Or if you have two people, it could look like this, where you guys come together and you bring your various areas of expertise rather than having to learn both sides yourself, and you riff off of each other and complement each other with the capabilities that you bring already. But more optimally, it will look like you have proper members of each teams coming together and someone who's coordinating in the middle. So the reason why I say the members of the blue team could be literally anyone from a number of different teams is because when I worked at Zoom, you know, there were separate SOC analysts, digital forensics, CTI teams, detection engineering, security engineering, the fuzzers, the AppSec people were all different teams. So I would have to loop in one or two members from like 7 to 9 or 7 to a dozen different teams, depending on the scope of the exercise. But when I work for a startup or for an SMB, it's generally myself playing probably the purple and the red part, and maybe 1 to 2 other people, someone who's got abilities to write detections, probably to Splunk, and someone who's got the ability to monitor the alerting dashboards and see if things are coming in. So the reason why it's so crucial to understand proper purple teaming methodology, say that 3 times fast, proper purple teaming methodology, is because it's such a customized product depending on the people organization of your current org and how the teams are laid out and where the lanes of responsibility are. So you have to understand who will be on your team and how to build it for each exercise, again, depending on the scope of that exercise. So any question on what makes, kind of quote, a purple team operator? Okay, I will assume not. So we kind of know what purple teaming is. We kind of know who does the purple teaming. But as an organization, how do we know when we should implement it? When should purple teaming start? And the sad truth is that most oftentimes purple team exercises start in the middle of an incident. Like, you've already found something bad. You have an event that is escalating quickly to an incident that might quickly escalate to a breach. And as all these people are coming together and doing incident response things, you know, you're like, probably the pen testers aren't even part of your incident response team, but you're like, get the pen testers in here because they're the people who also do the evil things. Maybe they can look at this and tell us what we're looking at. You got someone looking at logs, you've got someone looking at detections, you've got someone, looking at assets and doing all of that. So that's generally your first purple team exercise, is because everybody is coming together and they all have the mutual goal of trying to figure out what has happened, where did it originate, how far did it get, and how can we stop it. But in a more proactive security world, for small to mid-sized companies, I would say it should start in the early stages of in-house offensive operations. So if you're at the maturity standpoint where you're not going to put more dollars into continuing to build the walls higher, you're like, we've got a pretty good firewall in place, we've got a DMZ in place, we've got WAFs, we've got group policies, we've got auditing tools, we've got all these things in place. And really the next step is to just kind of fire some missiles and like see how well your defenses actually stand up. Or if you have a regulatory pen test coming up soon, that is really when I recommend you start implementing Purple Team Ops, because it's an excellent way to baseline your defenses. And rather than assuming things like the DMZ and your WAF are all functioning as intended, let's just test them and give them a qualitative defensive grade and say how well the visibility is, the number of data sources we've got reporting on that thing, and what our maturity of alerting on it or detecting it or blocking it is, and then move forward to the pen test from there. It's a much more advantageous spot to be in. But for larger organizations, generally this is going to start because you've already got really sophisticated in-house offensive operations off the ground. Maybe you have a red team or a pen tester, and they are killing it, man. They're getting to their objectives every time. They've got domain admin, they've got root access to AWS, like all of the things are going on for the red team. The blue team is feeling really beat up on. They're like, oh, great, the red team was successful again. So that's generally when larger orgs look introspectively and go, maybe there's something else we should try. And that's when they generally reach out to people like me, or someone like me working on the red team will say, hey, I have an idea. Why don't we try this instead? And they usually implement purple team exercises as a follow-on to red team operations. So at Zoom, what I did was I said, every time you execute a red team op, as an additional deliverable, let's take the TTPs that are repeatable, execute them in a purple team exercise with members of the blue side, get new detections out of it, get new confirmations of blocking malicious activity out of it, and say, out of 12 findings, we were able to successfully mitigate an additional 7, and now our only inherent risk after this is these 5. Maybe we can spend budget on these 5. Maybe there's a solution that will address these 5, maybe not, but we have removed as many steps from the likelihood aspect of this equation as possible. Okay, any questions on this piece? And I'm sorry, I know I talk fast. I only have a very small amount of time, but you guys can always slow me down in the recording if you want. Okay, I don't hear Robert. Someone ping the chat.
No questions in the chat, but
are there? I was like, someone ping the chat like a crazy person if Robert's trying to unmute and I just don't hear him.
We can hear you fine.
Okay. So no questions in the chat yet, you said, or there are?
No questions.
Nope. Okay. All right. Plugging right along. So why do we do purple team exercises? What are the objectives? Well, that is going to depend largely on your organization and the strategy of your security program. But again, at Zoom, I implemented them as a post-red team operation thing. So the red team op already had a pre-approved objective that was given to us by a stakeholder or identified from a regulatory need, or we have just identified that this is a hole that we have that we'd like to address. So then I just took that kill chain, again, identified the repeatable steps, brought that together in a collaborative exercise, kind of like a working session, and we mitigate around it as best we can. But purple team exercises can happen on their own. You can do standalone objectives. You can do stakeholder requests. It could be to evaluate a new tool or solution that you're looking at, or a vendor. It could be because you need to baseline something brand new and you want to see if something is really adding a true amount of value or not. You can punctuate specific security needs. Like I used to have detection engineers who would come to me and say, hey, we think this is a really big problem and no one is taking us seriously and they won't get a solution for us to mitigate it. Do you mind highlighting this in an operation? I'm like, oh, absolutely. We'll make that so big and splashy that it becomes everybody's top 10 problem. I'm not saying do that. Again, we don't want to market as red teamers based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but it is nice that we can take things that, the people who have boots on the ground think of as genuine vulnerabilities, and we can bring some awareness to them and kind of drive, again, moving the needle on that item, which makes you an ally to your blue teamers, which is a really sweet place to be in. But at the end of the day, all purple team objectives and red team objectives, for that matter, should come from CTI, which stands for Cyber Threat Intelligence. If you're not using cyber threat intelligence to drive your offensive testing, you are basically taking a dart and throwing it at the miter matrix and just saying, guess we'll mitigate on this TTP today. That sounds like a good bet. And you have no idea if it's actually providing a bunch of value to your org or not. Purple teams can be really, really effective tools and products to build because they are so highly customized that pretty much everything that is done is in a context-driven. Oh man, I can't say that twice. It's context driven for the organization. So you don't just have to use a CVSS score for a severity rating. You don't just have to arbitrarily assign a high, medium, or low. You can say, out in the wild, this might be a this, but given that we have all of these control factors and this is how effective they are, and we've confirmed this is how effective they are, we alerted on them 3 different ways, not just based on signature, et cetera. Also, we have really good telemetry or we have missing telemetry. You are going to provide a lot more return on investment to your organization for your offensive testing buck than if you're just simply guessing. So please use CTI, use a CTI feed, use a CTI tool, use something. If you are, it should go a little something like this. Again, I'm not going to go over this in depth. You can read it at your leisure after, but basically it helps you understand who is most likely to attack your organization? What are the things that they've been known to do? No one can protect you from a 0-day. That's not the point of a purple team. If anyone ever says they can protect you from 0-day attacks, you run the opposite way or you pay that person $10 trillion. There is no in between. But I sincerely doubt that that's true. So you just want to understand who would attack your org, what they've been seen to do in the past, make sure you're defending on or alerting on or blocking on, or at least have the ability to investigate on those known behaviors as much as possible, because if we can't protect against what's already out there, we're definitely not going to protect against the things that we're not aware of. And then that is how you know that you're doing context-driven defense for your org. And again, you're not just picking your favorite TTPs of the day because people say to. So, small recap. What we've learned, believe it or not, so far. We have learned kind of how to go about planning an exercise, kind of how to start figuring out who you might include, some of the people and roles that purple teams might be comprised of, some of the basic documents that are involved. A lot of that comes from the red team workflow as well, because they do the same thing: have an objective, define a plan, defend the plan, execute the plan, report on the plan. It's much the same for a purple team, except we do it collaboratively. Then, oh no, we're not at the recap. I was misled. I apologize. No, this is the overall process of planning a purple team exercise. You basically do plan like you would for a red team. You get an objective, you write a plan, you socialize the plan, you defend the plan, you execute the plan, which is to say day of, you bring everybody together on a Zoom call, much like this. I open up a comms channel and I simply say, we have so-and-so here who's going to be executing our exploits today. Please execute the first one. He executes the first one, runs the Python thing, runs the script, goes to the place, interacts with the callback, does whatever thing it is that we've already pre-identified. And then we ask the blue teamers, look in your logs, look in your alerting. Do you see it? Why not? What could we alert on? And you get a discussion going. And the red teamer is supposed to sit there and say, this is why I'm doing this. This is what I'm looking for. If I get this piece of info, this is what I would do with it. This is how it furthers me to my objective of X. And this red teamer is educating them on adversarial mindset. And your blue teamers are learning, but they're also learning, if I know he just executed a password spray and I don't see it, what do I see? Is that how password sprays always look in my environment? Can you do it again? Can you do it again from a different VM? Can you do it again on a different endpoint? And we start to learn really how things are going to look in our environment, so that if we're not able to automate alerting on or blocking that thing, at least that manual investigation has a lot more value add to it. And we're not just investigating false positives, which no blue teamer enjoys, to my knowledge. So you execute the exercise, you do your reporting, you glean your metrics, get results into a tool or into a report. I don't like reports. I recommend using tools or heat maps, but that you do track them across reporting and documents for posterity and for auditors. And then you do a postmortem, do an after action review, give the out briefs, tell the stakeholders and the operators and the other members of everyone's team what happened and what was successful, and what new things came out of it and what things are going to persist. And then just recommendations to the risk owners for that organization on what to do with the residual items. So any questions kind of on the purple team exercise process? Okay. Documentation. How do we go about documenting our purple team? How do we know that we're doing a good job actually quantifying that the thing that it is purple teams are doing? Because every single time I talk to someone that I work with, they think one of two things about my purple team. They think either that I'm just a pen tester doing more pen testing, or they have no idea what I'm doing and think that I'm not doing anything at all, which is a horrible place to be in. So documentation is definitely a key aspect of what we do. Things you need to ask yourself is the program that I'm building repeatable? If I stop showing up to work, would operations stop? Have you documented enough for anyone to be able to back you up? Because also vacations are a nice thing. And I'm sure you don't want to be around because you have to execute 8 purple team exercises this year for your OKR and no one can do it but you. Don't make yourself a bottleneck. Don't make yourself a bottleneck for results. Don't make yourself a bottleneck for metrics, and don't make yourself a bottleneck for getting operations executed. So some things you should be documenting are things like your flow that I put on previous slides. How does the operation actually go? If someone had to step in cold and try and lead one, would they know what to ask each party, how to keep the conversation going, what to explain? If they were planning one, do they know who to go to for the objectives and getting them approved? Do they know where the templates are? Do they know who the people of contact on all the other teams are? So if it's like, this exercise will require a SOC analyst and a detection engineer, great. Have you documented the heads of those teams so they can go to that manager and say, can you spare one of your resources from this date to this date for a purple team exercise? Just make sure you're documenting exactly what steps it is you walk through to get the exercise off the ground, who you talk to, what the deliverables are, what their options for deliverables are, certain tools or infrastructure the red team will have to have stood up to make this a success. And if you don't understand, go to the members of these teams and ask them to educate you. Say, hey, I'm building a purple team. I know I'm going to work with you guys. If I was trying to get an exercise off the ground, what would you need from me? How do I know what to tell you that I need? What are you capable of doing? And what would I have to say? You know, we need someone else who's got supplemental skills, scaling the purple team. So these are all parts of things that should be documented. You can also document a roadmap for maturing your purple team operations, which could look a little bit like this. I've used this actual one before in the past. It's one of my favorites. And I basically like to start with something called Atomic Red Team by Red Canary. It is open sourced. A lot of the one-liner scripts in there written in YAML are well known and detected on and alerted on by a lot of tools out there. But there are some that aren't. And again, I think there's value in doing stuff like this, because if you're not alerting on the stuff that is open sourced, how do you think you're going to alert on polymorphic malware? You're not. So it never hurts to just make sure you're doing the basics correctly before you graduate. But once you use something open source, you test a lot of TTPs across the board, you've got good baselines, then you can take those and start punctuating your known gaps with red team operations, conduct follow-on PTEs, identify new solutions, identify new defenses. You can move into proper adversarial emulation. You can start incorporating true CTI. You can start doing, again, CTF style engagements where you don't let the blue and red side talk to each other after you've done enough of these. And they're like, ooh, I'm on to you, man. I know you like to hide your callbacks. Like in the 4800 ports, they're like, all right, bro. Like, it's so fun to see those teams stand up next to each other and know that they actually stand a good chance rather than just watching one team get beat up on, which is bad for morale, bad for defense, and bad for security. So please don't be the red teamer on your purple team who just enjoys poning the crap out of other people for fun. We think it's fun, but no one else thinks it's fun. So, some things to keep in mind with your purple team. Operation cadence. If you are integrating with the flow of red team operations, make sure the blue team isn't getting fatigued. Like they've just done a red team operation and they have actual investigations to take care of and actual patches and a backlog of tickets and all these things going. So make sure your cadence is respectful of the things that the other teams have going on. And if you work for a large scale tech enterprise, you might have to be considerate of like 13 different departments' timelines. So just make sure you're communicating with GRC people and the CTI people and the BCP people and pretty much everybody whose work your department's work might touch, and make sure you're being super respectful, but do make sure that you're accomplishing your objectives as well. Pick a scribe. Every single purple team exercise that I execute, one person's job it is to strictly log the timestamps of when something was executed, where it was executed from, and who did it, and then track whether or not it was detected and at what time, or blocked and at what time, or showing up in the logs and at what time. Because I'm over here helping to liaise between the teams and educate and discuss. And okay, well, maybe we can't alert on every time the clipboard is used because that's a built-in utility that a lot of people use. But could we alert on every time someone uses the clipboard from the command line, which is not very typical of your average user? Things like that. So I want to make sure someone else is in charge of just logging the tiny details that I'm going to need to pull metrics from later. Don't make it your job. You will not have the time if you are leading the exercise. But I also never make the same person scribe twice. If you're a newbie to the exercise, and I've got some veterans on with me already who've already done an exercise with me, the next time you get to move out of scribe duty and we bring on someone else new, and it gets more and more people from those teams exposure to what it is we do here. But I do recommend that you pick a scribe. Demonstrate value of your purple team. Don't just do what red teams do and put everything in a report. This is what we did. This is what was successful. This is why it was successful. We recommend that you fix that. Don't do that. Say this TTP had an ease factor of this, like someone very basic could do it. It took a lot of troubleshooting. It took 2 of our best red teamers to make this happen. Give it a risk factor. Don't just use CVSS. Make sure it's context driven to your organization. Make sure you can communicate the impact of those findings to non-technical business managers. Because if you're like, I was able to blah, 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 the root, blah, 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 the domain thing, people are like, okay, why does that matter to me? I could have gone in there and shut down your whole website, and then you would have lost thousands of dollars every hour that people couldn't come here and buy things. Oh, okay, a dollar value, that we understand. So make sure as the purple team, like the purple teamer, you're able to take the technical things that you're doing and give them impact and business context to other people outside of the technical departments that you will deal with. These are some of my favorite CTI resources. These are some of my favorite open source tools with getting started: red teaming, purple teaming, adversarial emulation, and also reporting. These are other resources, some of which contributed to this very presentation. And that's all I've got. So are there any questions?
I do have one question, Maril, and thank you for speaking with the group. So one thing I guess I've worked on with our team is getting folks to move from that early step of using, say, Atomic Red Team with the one-off TTP purple team exercises, and getting them to work towards actually using a chain of things to try and prove a little bit more realistic of an attack. So for example, instead of one-off credential dumping TTP, looking at things like a password spraying attack and tuning together. What have you seen as far as helping bridge that gap in both like the process perspective and getting people to understand why that jump is important, as well as any tips you have for the actual nuts and bolts of moving from A to B.
Okay, so the question is because people want to rely on those open source, like, are they avert to doing more sophisticated styles of attack, or they don't know how, or I just want to make sure I answer the right way.
Yeah, it's not being opposed to it. It's helping people understand, I guess, the importance.
Okay, so it's because most oftentimes, like, it is good, like I said, to make sure you can defend and alert on things that do come from open source tools and have known signatures. Like Mimikatz has a known signature pretty much every EDR solution should be able to detect and block on, and yet certain APTs are still able to pull it down and use it on local boxes and execute successful kill chains with it. So that same argument that is for the open source or the known signature attack can be made for the atypical attack as well. You want to make sure that when they do get away from that, that you're not just alerting on the signature, that you're alerting on the malicious behavior, that you know what the baseline is and what the typical traffic on the network looks like, so that when all that anomalous stuff does start happening, when someone is going through 12 redirects, when you do see people logging in from geofenced or blacklisted countries, when you do see large numbers of proxy hops being used and stuff like that, that you can alert on that as well. That's actually a thing you can alert on. So I only recommend using the open source tools to baseline yourselves. But once you have a pretty good idea of how things look, like actually perform, like, let your red teamers do their thing. And if you as the solo resource are not able to get more sophisticated, then make the case for getting a resource on board, even on a contractual basis, who can, and let them, here's my objective for you. What is the most creative way you can think of to get there? Well, I would send out a fish. I would stand up, an evil jinx server. I would try to live man in the middle, credential capture. Then I would try to bypass Okta. Then I would start touching all these things. So, once a hacker is in, they have to perform certain situational awareness. They have to start enumerating things. They have to start discovering where they're at, what they can touch, what they can do. So those are even behaviors you can alert on. So your case for advocating for that type of graduation is to say that just alerting beyond the use of a certain piece of software, can we alert on the anomalous behavior? Can we take the things we know hackers are going to do, again, showing the blue side, why hackers do certain things, what we're after, and how we get there, and saying, is there anything around this you can alert on? Maybe not the syntax. Maybe they're not, like when we want to fly really low and slow under the radar, I don't use anything but LS, and I'm just CDing and LSing all over the place, trying to figure out what I might have permissions to touch. Because I'm kind of planning how I want to bake my cake, because I know I might only get one shot to bake it before I'm alerted on. So, that's really the case for that you make for starting to graduate operations to that level. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. And it's one of those, we've been trying to, get people to look past just the single TTP, detection, prevention stuff, and being able to, move towards the more advanced and get closer to the true adversary emulation space, where I think there's a lot more value. And it seems like the, one-off TTP type projects are good for getting people into like a rhythm.
Yeah.
But getting them to see that this isn't, the real value is once we have this in place, we can start doing, chaining things together into what an attack actually looks like.
I agree. There are a lot of people out there giving talks saying, don't just defend to the matrix. Don't just say, oh, well, that TTP is done and check a box. And once you've got the matrix colored in like a paint by numbers, you're good. And that's true. Don't do that. Use it as a starting point. Use it as a common language, get everyone on the same page, but realize that MITRE in and of itself has its limitations. And while it's great that tools can align their testing to those TTPs, I almost wish we could define and alert on the motive or the behavior or the goal rather than the procedure that gets us there. Because I know that if someone's goal is to get to the instance or the S3 where I'm hosting a bunch of juicy data, I'm like, I don't care what it looks like if anyone is touching this, but 10 people I've approved from these specific IP addresses, I want to know. If anyone is sending packets at it, I want to know. If anyone is attempting to get there from another VPC, I want to know. And that's not technically a TTP you can alert on, but it is anomalous, malicious behavior that I can look out for. So just be aware that like MITRE can only publish as TTPs things that they have seen in actual attacks in the wild. They don't publish everything that is possible. They only publish that which they have seen and can verify through certain sources. So while it is a great starting point, it is not an omnipotent end all be all to proactive offensive security by any means. Any other questions?
Yeah, there is one in the chat. Sorry, go ahead. Is that?
Oh, so I'll get out of full screen. I'll check the chat if that'll help. Okay, so I'm an advanced beginner. I'm wondering if there are any resources where I can watch an actual attack / defend in process. To my knowledge, because of the highly customized and sensitive nature of these things, none have been recorded, at least that I'm allowed to share. But I mean, I would be all for, maybe I should stand up a little lab environment where I can get some buddies of mine to come together and play both sides, and we could do an example. But no, unfortunately, I don't think there are any demo recordings of something like a PTE out there. I'm sorry. Your best example for doing that, honestly, might just be, Eli, I don't know what your background is, but if you do come from one of the blue functions, maybe you can ask to get a ride along to a red team operation sometime or a pen test. And as they're going about executing certain things or attacking certain things, you could ask why or what they're hoping to do. And then you as the defender can just know for yourself, okay, if you were doing that, this is how I would try and find you. If you were doing that, but I had no idea where you were doing it, like how might you start trying to teach yourself how to find where they were and what they were doing? Which again is the whole point of bringing teams together and doing it purple style. So yeah. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay.